Okay, so we are live. Welcome to tonight's stream. My guests are Keith Horn and Harrison. I always am afraid to mess up your last name, so say it for me, please.
Inga Marson.
Inga Marson. Okay, all right.
Just got to put a Swedish lilt on it. Inga
That's
Marson.
there. You go. There you go. All right. So tonight's stream is about how to listen to music, and I want to say we're going to kind of gauge this towards beginners, new people. But if you're an experienced musician and you have, you know, already a pretty good idea how to listen to music, I think you'll still pick up some things. I think even, you know, people like Keith, who is a professional musician composer, that's what he does when he gets up in the morning till it's quitting time at the end of the day. Keith, you can speak to, like, do you ever achieve a place where you don't have to learn anything else and you can sit on top of the mountain and let other people come up and learn from you? Or are you always learning and picking up stuff?
Far
Even
from it, yeah,
yeah,
constantly. The more I learn, the more I'm humbled by it. I don't seem to know anything. Is how it
absolutely.
seems to go. All it does is expand exponentially the amount of things there are to know about music.
Yeah, knowledge is like shining a light, and if you're in darkness and ignorance, you don't know how big the room is, and you assume that the room is pretty small. But the minute you turn on a little light, and the brighter light gets, the more you realize you're in this huge cavern with many passages through it, and you will never live long enough to learn everything
Yeah,
about
I
where
haven't even
you're at.
found the walls of the cavern yet. It's
Yes,
just
yes.
endless.
Or
Learning
we
is a
all
never-ending journey, no matter what topic you're talking about.
Absolutely, and that's one of the taglines I've used with my channel is never stop learning, and that's an attitude I want to communicate in tonight's stream. Is that even if you are tuning in and you're pretty well versed and been listening to music your entire life and feel like you know you know a lot, by all means share with us in the comments. Share what you listen for in music and stuff. Join in on our conversation. We'll try to respond as we can. We're going to keep it to about 90 minutes tonight, so we're going to have to move very quickly. I was just telling Keith and Harrison I'm used to having 16 weeks in a semester to kind of go over everything, and I never felt like I could cover everything. So I'm sure in 90 minutes there's going to be a whole lot we can't cover. But I'm going to give Keith and Harrison a few minutes just to kind of introduce themselves, talk about any projects they're working on or anything they've got going on they want to mention. And then we're going to start by just talking about how you listen to music. And again, with the approach that we're going to be mainly speaking to like beginners. And we're going to be speaking to how we listen to music and how it depends on the nature of the music we're listening to, that we may adjust that. Because one thing is we don't want to listen to all music the same. Just like you don't approach with your other senses. Like you don't look at a movie the same way as you look when you're just walking down the street. You use your eyes differently. So we're going to be speaking a little bit to that. But Keith, I'll hand it off to you. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe some stuff you got going on. Definitely plug your YouTube channel. And if you're not yet subscribed, subscribe to both Keith and Harrison. They both have amazing channels.
The last two times I forgot to plug the YouTube channel. I had to jump back in after and plug the channel. But I'm Keith Horn. I'm a composer by day and a composer by night, and a composer most of the times between. Right now I'm working on a show called Robo Gobo for Disney Junior that it airs in January of 25. I'm also working on a series called Chibiverse for Disney, and starting next week I'm going to start working on the Phineas and Ferb reboot with the fantastic composer Danny Jacob. I'll be on his team. So very busy this year and through next year. Very grateful that I have plenty of work to do. My YouTube channel, when I do have time to work on it, which is not much lately, just kind of how it goes with YouTube channels. It sort of ebbs and flows. I focus on a series called Chord of the Week, where I focus on an individual chord that I find interesting, and just spend 5 to 10 minutes talking about that one chord, doing a deep dive on just one element. So that's what I focus on my YouTube channel, and I am happy to be here talking about listening to music.
Absolutely. And I put in your website there for you.
Oh, there's an extra H in there.
Oh, yeah, it's too many. I put too many. So let's hide that and adjust that. Technical difficulties, folks. Technical difficulties. We're not quite ready for prime time, I don't think. So there we go. KeithHorn.com. Yes.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, if you're watching and want to join in on the conversation, by all means, comment. We'll try to feature your comment. If you're watching this after the stream is said and done, and you have some questions or comments, by all means, do that. I pretty much respond to every comment. Most of them, so we'll get back with you on that if you have a comment or something. Harrison, your turn.
Yeah, so I have a YouTube channel called Inga Music. In the realm of music, I do a little bit of everything. I do composing, orchestration, transcription, piano performance. But most of what I do is just for fun, even though I have a formal music education. And if you play piano yourself and ever find it hard to find the sheet music for certain film scores, you might find my channel interesting because I upload a lot of sheet music for film scores that you really can't find anywhere else, and I just do them by ear. And I also have original compositions up there if those are interesting to you as well. But that's pretty much what I do.
Yeah, speaking of which, I think there was a book or a comic book or something that had a Kickstarter or something, and the other day I was listening to the music you wrote for that.
Modern Dread.
Modern Dread, that's it. That was some good work
cool.
You did on that.
Thanks. Yeah, I was really proud of that one. That was a lot of fun. And stylistically right up my alley.
Keith, if you haven't listened to it.
If you have the chat, some of that music available to hear, I'd love to listen to that. Yeah. What was it called again? What Dread?
Modern Dread.
Modern Dread.
Yes, Modern Dread.
It was supposed to be kind of like Twilight Zone, but for the 21st century, so there's a lot of our modern day technology integrated with these horror concepts.
Cool.
That's awesome.
That's fun.
Yeah. So, yeah, definitely check out Harrison's music for that. Check out Keith's channel. Like he said, the Chord of the Week series is really cool. You did the, I think the Rite of Spring chord is one of my favorites that you did. Yeah, it's
thanks.
a very well-known chord. And then you, of course, you did the,
chord.
Didn't you do the Vertigo chord?
The Vertigo love theme.
The love theme. The what
theme.
they call the Tristan chord, I think, or I think.
It's very similar to the Tristan chord.
Yeah,
or it's very similar to something out of Tristan and Isolde.
Yeah, by Wagner. So yeah. All right. Well, let's kind of wrap it back up to you, Keith.
Sure.
Speak to how you listen to music, like actively first, and then, like I said, you can speak a little bit to how you switch. Well, actually, and then we'll go to Harrison with the same question. Then we'll come back to you, how you listen when it's not active listening, maybe. Mm-hmm. So go ahead and start us off.
Active listening for me as a musician and as a composer is analytic listening. It's the more you learn about music, the more you aspire to know what's going on with what you're listening to. So making a choice, it's not always a choice. A lot of times I think once you've been a musician and a composer and you've learned some theory and you can understand what's happening, the analytic part of your inner ear just turns on automatically and you start to just sort of dissect what you hear. The chord progression, the orchestration, the tempo, the key, any category of musical analysis that you could think of, that's active listening for me. And usually, like we did an episode on transcription, and that's an example of active listening, a very focused active listening of trying to find precisely what's happening with each and every note, writing it down. That's probably the most focused version of active listening. Mm-hmm. And then the burden of that, of having that analytical musical ear, the burden is it's hard to turn it off. So I have to actually practice not doing that. And I have to practice listening passively So either just sort of turning it on and not analyzing it and letting it come in, feeling the groove. Pop music is easy to do that with because you can just sort of drop into a groove. For me, pop music does that. Jazz, because a lot of times it's especially more progressive jazz, it's too difficult to figure out on the fly anyway. So the analytical part of my brain just sort of checks out and gives up. Then I can drop into just listening passively. And the other way I like to listen as an active practice is to listen emotionally, to not try to figure out what's happening in the music, to not try to analyze it, and just drop in and try to just feel what it does to me emotionally. I think of listening with the head versus listening with the heart as two separate practices.
Oh, yeah. And that reminds me of a quote by Beethoven. I think he told a student one time that was worried about playing the wrong notes, and therefore their playing was very mechanical and methodical. And he was like, it is a sin to hit a wrong note. It is a greater sin to play without passion. So
I've used that quote many times
yes,
when directing like
exactly.
choirs and stuff.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like, hit those wrong notes, take a chance, take a risk. Anything in life worth doing takes a risk, and you have to do that as a musician. Matter of fact, I don't really feel like I'm actually playing music until I kind of engage. You want to learn a piece, and go through the technical part, but then you get to, turn on the emotion. And it translates to listening, too. Like you said, sometimes you have to remind yourself to let the music just take you to where it's trying to take you. Now, do you feel like you as a film and television composer, is it even harder for you when you're watching a movie? Say you go out with your wife and watch a movie. Are you able to cut off your analytical brain when you're watching someone else's film score?
I think it's easier watching TV and film because there are more things to focus on that are non-musical. Yeah. Just paying attention to the story, the dialogue, as it was intended when it was made. It's intended for the audience to not listen to the music. It's just to sort of let the music invisibly sort of penetrate your mind and body as an audience member. I think it's easier in movies to just sort of tune out the music, but
except for maybe
pure music, it's harder.
Yeah. Except for maybe like main titles and end credits, something that is missing from a lot of movies and TV shows. Matter of fact, I think Breaking Bad kind of, as much as I love Breaking Bad, it kind of really started the whole thing of like, here's a little 3-second stinger instead of a full intro sequence.
And these days I skip the main title most of the time anyway. I listen to it the first time I watch the show just to sort of get a vibe. And then I fast forward.
What's funny is
but I do.
When it's such a short little intro and it still has the option, like I was watching The Bad Batch, I think, and its main title music, if you can call it that, is like just a quick, like one chord, like one that, it's like a choir singing thing, and that's it. It literally is like 5 seconds long, and the little skip intro button pops up for all of like 10 seconds. And I'm like, what's the point?
Saving 3 seconds.
Yeah, it's saved, I guess, if you watch 1,000 episodes of it, it's going to save you 3,000 seconds. So, but yeah, let's move to Harrison. How do you, Harrison, actively listen to music? Like,
well, just to start off, I definitely don't think that there's any right or wrong way to listen to music.
Yes,
music is a very personal experience when you listen to it, and like you were saying, Keith. There's both an emotional and an intellectual element to it. And the last thing I think anyone should ever do is try to gatekeep music by saying, you gotta listen to it this way. But on this particular topic, I was trying to think of what I had to say about it, and I'm not entirely sure I have much to say at this stage. This might be something where I have still a bit to learn maybe from you guys today. I definitely know I am very much an active listener. I think it's almost impossible for me to be a passive listener. Call that the blessing or a curse.
I tend to be that way too. So
I almost never put music on in the background, not to be actively listened to. Like if I'm driving in the car and listening to music, the music is still pretty much the primary focus. aside from driving. But,
so your car insurance bill every month is really high then. So
yeah, they're monitoring how much I listen to music.
Yeah. But you could technically be called get a DWI then. You're driving under influence. It just wasn't alcohol, it was music, you know.
Right.
Tchaikovsky's that intoxicating, you know.
But yeah, it will be interesting to see what you guys have to say on this topic.
Yeah.
I know what I can say is that I'm very much biased towards music that has interesting and unexpected harmonies or chord progressions. So if you know, if someone plays me a song, and you know, it could be like a really well-written song, well-produced, but if it's all diatonic, it's probably not going to really make me feel anything. But then, you know, if I listen to some Louis Cole or something, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he's got like harmonies off the charts, and like that, the surprise in the harmonies is what evokes emotions out of me. And so the more interesting the harmonies are, the more likely it is to affect me. But I will admit that sometimes I focus on that at the expense of the other elements of music, like rhythm or lyrics.
Yeah.
That could be a shortcoming on my part, really. But
now, is that how you spell Louis Cole there?
I think so. That looks about right.
Now, I'd put that in the stream just so I can go back later and remember it. So,
yeah, he's got some really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
But just I love talking about what you were just saying, being sort of intellectually stimulated by the element of surprise, right? I mean, for those that aren't musicians, diatonic is if you just play anything on the white keys of a piano, that's the key of C. And if you play nothing but white keys, you're in the key of C, no matter what you do. And if you know some music and you know your scales, you'll understand that the scales represent a key, and as long as you use the notes of that scale, the 7 notes, that's diatonic. And what Harrison's talking about is going outside of that and creating a sense of surprise. But that sense of surprise that you get from what you call interesting harmony, which I share that with you, you get like an emotional response.
Yeah, it's like both simultaneously.
It's like it's both like, ooh, that's really interesting and surprising, and that's intellectually stimulating and satisfying, but it also hits you emotionally somehow.
Yeah, the two come hand in hand, and I don't really know how to describe why that's the case, but
yeah,
it's really interesting. I think I share that. I think there's like a sense of joy that comes from that surprise, I guess, which is an emotion, right? There's like, it's a pleasant surprise. Oh yeah, look what they just did, and then it makes you smile because it's
even
surprising.
As infants, you know, we've all done the thing where you have an object and then you hide it from the baby and bring it back and you surprise them, or you play peekaboo. Even at infancy, you know, we're entertained, and like some babies, like if you're a little overboard with it, might cry, but most babies laugh and they giggle. Like we still are that way, and
interesting.
It's it's
peekaboo chords.
Yeah, peekaboo, like Haydn's Surprise Symphony. Look it up. Second movement. There was one recording of that. If you don't know, it's in the second movement. It starts off with like a little lullaby theme, and then he plays it again, even slower, like softer. And then all of a sudden there's a boom, like a really loud chord. And there's one you can watch on YouTube. There's one performance where I guess an old lady fell asleep or something. And when they went boom, you hear her go, oh, like that.
Surprise.
Yeah. And then the orchestra's like trying not to laugh and keep playing. But Haydn got tired. You know, this is 102nd or 94th symphony. Needs to say Haydn had written a lot of symphonies, and he was getting a little sick and tired of the aristocracy snoozing off on the second movement. Because that's something, when you listen to classical music, at least second movements are almost always a slow movement. Matter of fact, there's a music appreciation text called Music Appreciation or How to Stay Awake During Anybody's Second Movement.
Nice.
So,
that's something to listen for in music right there.
Yes.
If you listen to a symphony, listen for the tempo of the second movement, and it's probably Probably
Yeah,
going to be slow.
and tempo comes from the same root word tempus in the Latin, tempo in Italian, which is derivative of Latin. It just means time. You know, if you play something slowly, it takes more time to play it. So tempo, tempus, you know, tempus fugit, you know, the Latin saying time flies. So I'm probably mispronouncing that. You'll find it's the only problem with live streams. I ain't got time to pause real quick and go, you know, to listen to how it's actually pronounced. But real quick, I have a couple comments here. I actually know who's commenting. He's a friend of mine. So here's Derek saying, when watching a film, what is more impressive to you? When you listen to the music or when the music is integral to the scene, but you don't even notice it?
Well, I would say if I don't notice it, then it doesn't make an impression that I'm conscious of. So I think in hindsight, I think it's a great question, because in hindsight, I'll be like, wait, was there music in that scene? Why am I crying?
Yeah.
Oh, because the scene, everything comes together, the drama, the acting, the music, and I didn't even. It's just the culminating effect of everything happening at once. Where, you know, they say the best film composers are the ones where you don't even notice music is there.
Right.
Which I think that part of the craft, or art, I suppose, is the most impressive thing.
Absolutely.
I don't know if I entirely agree with that, because my favorite scores are generally the ones where the music kind of stands out as its own character, almost, but is not intrusive at the same time. You know, you don't want it to you know, detract from the film because it's drawing too much attention to itself. But I feel like a score should have its own identity and character and be memorable in some way. And for me, that really enhances the experience. You know, if I walk away and if I wasn't able to, you know, pick up any motifs or themes, then I feel like that was a very forgettable and unimpressive score.
Well, it's serviceable. At least it's done its
job. Yeah, it can be serviceable, but for me, that's not good enough to be something that impresses me personally.
Well, it's like having a waiter. You know, ultimately, the best experience, especially if you're out, you know, on a romantic outing or something, you don't want the waiter or waitress, like, you want to get good service, but you don't want them interrupting your conversation every 5 minutes. You know, are y'all okay? Are y'all okay? You know, but I guess it's the same thing. It's like you want the service there, but if they're not intruding too much, and I think, you know, that would be a whole other debate we could have, is like sometimes the music, and I'm sure we've all seen the movies where the composer was a little too ambitious. You can tell they really want to be the next John Williams, but they're scoring a little independent film, and the music is a little heavy-handed. I think that's
that was totally me.
So. Yeah, although with the and I'll put it up here. It's the Modern Dread thing. Check out Harrison's music for Modern Dread. I heard a whole lot of Danny Elfman in that. So.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, if it makes sense given the genre and stuff. So
I wear my influences on my sleeve. So
yes. Well, if you're gonna be influenced by like 90s and early 2000s Danny Elfman there. So, all right. So this is how I felt the first time I watched Last of the Mohicans. Very good film, and part of it was shot in my home state of North Carolina, I believe. I never realized how much the music drove the action, but actively listening to it is so incredibly moving. Yes. And very interesting story behind that score. It was actually two people. I believe one of them their score was rejected, and then the second composer had to come in and kind of adapt some of that and write original music too. So, but yeah, Last of the Mohicans has got a beautiful soundtrack. If you haven't heard it, check it out. Any of you want to speak to that before we start looking at some music examples here? Well, we still need to talk to how to not actively. Well, you kind of talked to that, Keith. Harrison, did you have anything real quick to say about how to not actively listen, or do you want to have us move on?
Yeah, I don't do that very well.
Okay.
I'm constantly, because I've been playing piano almost as long as I've been, actively listening to music, and so I'm always trying to map what I'm hearing onto the keys. So I'm not good at passively listening. I'll admit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, I do tend to listen to a lot of music. Fortunately, my job is the kind that I'm on the computer most of the day, and most of the time I'm dealing with like stuff in the computer. I don't need to talk to people directly, and and so I can kind of listen to music while I work. I have to be careful what I listen to, because sometimes I start getting drawn in, and I have to switch what I'm listening to. I'm like, can't listen to that. I'm not going to get anything done today, because I start
why
like
is
saying,
Chris been in tears for the last hour?
yeah. Well, no, why is Chris trying to figure out these 3 chords he can't figure out? So, but anyway, real quick, feel free to comment, ask questions, whether you're watching this now live or watching it once it's been recorded. We will do our best to respond to it and stuff. So, all right, well, let's move on. Let's look at some music examples. What do we want to start with here?
I thought Air was interesting. I mean, you have it first.
Okay. Sure.
I mean, of course, it's it's one of the great. It's arguably the most famous Bach piece of all.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for the non-musicians, Bach was a kind of almost in a way one of the great founders of our modern music kind of heritage in Western music right now. I mean, there's hardly anybody that's a professional musician even today that hasn't heard or studied. I mean, you can go on YouTube and even, I know I'm dating myself by saying Sting, but most people know who Sting is. Former lead singer and musician of the Police. I don't know, he might still play with them. All those bands from the 80s get back together nowadays anyway. But he's a solo artist too. And, there's a YouTube video I've seen, more than one, where he speaks about Bach and how he's just was so challenged and still is challenged as a musician. Like I don't think I've ever come across a single musician, whether I'm watching an interview or in person, that has not just been absolutely fascinated by Bach. And the irony to that is Bach never traveled more than like 100 miles from the place he was born. He was revered very much as a musician, an organist, a performer when he was alive, but his actual compositions, believe it or not, back in Bach's day, like it's almost like today. What was popular 10 minutes ago is old news, and nobody wanted to go back and listen to that. And matter of fact, he had a reputation late in life of, his sons, many of them were musicians and composers too, were kind of, in letters that we have survived, are kind of poking at him saying, "Dad, you need to get with the times." And, and Keith, you got to visit in Leipzig, where the church that he taught at wrote music for, and there was also a school attached to it that he taught at.
Last year in May of 23, it was awesome. We were passing through, and I'm like, Leipzig is right here. We have to stop. We'll go to the Thomaskirche and go in, and there's his stone. There were roses on it, and there was someone upstairs on the organ having a lesson. While
that's
I was in there.
amazing.
Just learning and playing his music. It was the coolest.
I'm incredibly envious of that. So,
so cool.
That's on my bucket list, is to go to Leipzig and see that. So, but anyway, a little bit about Bach and his music is that, another thing that the Baroque music, which is the period in which he wrote, is there was a very strong, almost like what we call a rhythm section. Keith, you want to explain what a rhythm section is in modern day, like rock bands and stuff?
Anything that doesn't use wind. So, if you take out the saxophones and the trombones and the trumpets from a jazz band, what you have left is the drummer, the bass player, the guitar player, and the pianist.
Yeah, and they usually stand near each other, because the bass player is listening to the drum. Even in a heavy metal band, you'll often see the bass player never gets that far away from, nowadays we've got monitors in their ears and stuff, but traditionally they kind of, the rhythm section, it's like the bass. There's even a genre of music called what? Bass and... What's it called?
Drum and bass? Yeah.
Drum and bass, yeah. There's a whole genre of music that gets its name. Yeah. So the rhythm, the beat, the kind of pulse that you feel in music that's established, it can very much be done by the bass. And if you listen in the Air and G string, it's like the bass, which is called basso continuo. It was usually a keyboard instrument like a harpsichord, a cello or double bass violin. And you would have that kind of regular pulse. And if you listen to the bass line, you'll hear it's pretty much in the pulse of the music. So this is one of the things that you can definitely listen for, is is what we call the beat in music. Now, people use beat and rhythm interchangeably all the time. You know, what do we say when a song has a cool rhythm? We don't say that song has a good rhythm. We say song has a good beat.
Groove.
Yeah. But the beat is actually the regular pulse. Like, it's just like if you take your pulse, you know, as long as you're sitting still, you're not exercising, what is your pulse? It's regular. Matter of fact, my wife's a nurse, and she'll tell you when nurses take your pulse, they usually only take about 10 seconds of it. But when they write down your pulse, it's for a whole minute. And the reason for that is you get 10 seconds, you times it by 6, they know that heartbeat is not going to change. So when we listen to this air on the G string, listen to the bass, meaning the lowest voice. And it does stick out pretty well in this. And you'll hear, you know, the violins playing a melody. It's a really long sustained note in the beginning. So you can hear the bass pretty well. But any other observations real quick before we play a few seconds of it?
There was I was actively listening to this earlier today. I usually passively listen to this piece, but one thing I noticed is that in the beginning there seem to be two things happening. The bass that you're talking about, you'll hear it sort of walking down in a consistent tempo, a consistent beat, and then you have this sustaining element that's more horizontal that splits off into 2 or 3 different voices, and then back. There are times where if you listen very closely, in the middle, you'll hear the melody at the top, the bass at the bottom, and in the middle, there can be 1, 2, or 3 different things happening in the middle. So that's really fascinating to look out for.
And you may recall our former teacher, David McHugh, he said that many times to us, is that good music, even film music that's supposed to be in the background supporting the film, he said there's almost always 3 things going on at any given time. It could be a rhythmic thing. It could be harmonic. It could be melodic. You know, it could be 2 voices interacting with each other, like you said. And so that's another thing you can listen for in music, is like try to figure out, go back and listen to the opening minute of a piece like 3 times and look for something different each time and see how those 3, like you observed, interacted with each other and came together. So,
let's hear it.
Yeah, let's play some. We'll play about a minute of it now. I'm going to be speak very briefly about this. YouTube copyright being what it is and stuff, we don't want to get, you know, flagged. Is I worked very hard mining out some public domain music that should pass the copyright test. With that being said, they're not all the best quality recordings, and unfortunately, we're going to be kind of limited to older music like the music of Bach, which, you know, he lived in the 17th and 18th century. So more modern music has stricter copyright on it and stuff. So we can't play it. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to pull a whole lot of modern music. So, but, you know, one of the reasons we use the classical music is that it's part of the cultural heritage, and it's in many ways a great teaching tool because there's so much going on in it. So let's dive right in. Here's Johann Sebastian Bach's Air on the G string. Okay, we'll stop it right there. Kind of goes back to the beginning there. Hopefully you could hear, like we said, the kind of walking bass line, like Heath pointed out. Something else I would encourage you to go back and listen to too is let's talk about dissonance and consonance, chaos and order, pain and relief. How would you speak to how that first 45 seconds or so, how did Bach do with that kind of contrast.
Well, quite masterfully, I think, as to be expected from Bach.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like what we were talking about earlier with, diatonic or, expected notes versus non-diatonic, more unexpected notes. I think something interesting to notice in this piece is that it starts off very diatonic for, like, I guess you would call it like the first phrase of the melody. And
let's
then,
go back and play it in real time as you talk to it. So this is stable.
Yeah, so this is nice. Nothing too unexpected.
Now right there, da 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 da. It's just a little tinge of instability, so to speak.
A little bit, but it's not too much.
And then it goes
a little extra tension, but nice resolution.
Ooh.
Oh, and then
see that you can't end the piece on that. Bach's that's not gonna be the last chord there, because I'm gonna back it up just a little bit, let you hear that again. So again, a little stability, tension, and then release.
But into
tension.
A minor, like sadder. Back to home base.
And then at the end of the phrase, what we call a cadence in music, it's kind of coming together. He's solidified. He hasn't strayed so far from your, home base. He's established what Keith was talking about, the diatonic, firmly, so that he can go back, and then that's repeated again, further cementing it. And then after that repeat, he then begins to explore in more foreign territory. So
it's, he quite masterfully goes back and forth between, these pleasant, expected chords to these transitional moments where there's a lot of tension and uncertainty, but then ultimately usually go back to home base.
Absolutely. It's just like telling a story. You open up, you meet your characters, things are fairly stable, but if you keep things stable, if Frodo never leaves the Shire and Sauron never comes back, then what good story is that? You're going to get really bored reading about hobbits sitting around and just eating food all the time.
Yeah.
So as pleasant as much as we seek that out in life, we pretend like we seek out stability and comfort and don't want to have any discomfort. It's like the Guns N' Roses album of the late 80s, Appetite for Destruction. We all have that little appetite for destruction,
Well, let's listen to that.
Yeah, that would be a good one.
I don't think we can get away with that one, can we?
No. So I'm going to let it just kind of keep playing. And Keith, I want you to speak in when he's returning to the sort of opening here again that we've heard before. So it's pretty much going to repeat note for note for that.
Top, but the melody at the top is what catches your attention.
Yeah. And
you can choose to just take in the pure beauty of it and just let it wash over you. I think that's part of the brilliance of Bach. Is it can be very intellectually stimulating.
Absolutely.
You can try to follow each voice and jump around as to which one you're choosing to follow, or you could just take it in and pretend you're at a wedding in the year 1700.
Absolutely. So now it's repeated. What's happening here?
We have a third section here, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And you can hear...
It's a whole lot of melody lines bumping into each other.
It's also, you can just sort of feel the expansion dynamically. It gets a bit louder, as if it's sort of... And then it kind of exhales.
Every phrase is clearly defined.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Both through the harmonies and the dynamics.
And they rise and they fall.
And if the opening two-part, which we'll label them by letters of the alphabet, it was A, and then it repeated A again. So we had A. That was establishing home base. That's the Shire. Now, the B section is where they leave the Shire, and they go to the Mines of Moria and all this.
This is just the Prancing Pony in the B section.
Yeah. Well, I say all that because I want you to keep that A in mind that we heard twice, and there's a reason Bach played it twice. was to, it's our familiar point. So right now we're still in a foreign land, and things are still a little unfamiliar to us. But that's the surprise. And here, Bach is building something.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of stacking up to a point, and then it's kind of subsiding again.
But it's fun to jump around. We're doing different modes of listening on the fly.
Yeah.
There's so many different ways to listen, and we're illustrating all of them here, just spontaneously. Slowing down.
Yeah.
Tension.
And then he comes back to listen to that chord there. Now go back to the beginning. What was our opening note? Here it came back to home bass. And if you'd studied the piece, he does go through, what we know is like, slight modulations, secondary dominance and stuff, basically kind of moving the home bass around a little bit in that middle section. So overall, the structure is like A, and then B. And the reason you have the double A there is to solidify that home bass. And then when you go to the foreign land, even though it doesn't end with a repetition of A, it still comes back to that, what we call the key, the center point, the diatonicness of that last chord brings us back home.
And that, as you said earlier, Bach is one of the inventors of doing that very thing, of starting this sort of home bass. We're in this key, and composers and musicians are always so amazed by how he can, like, in an almost sleight of hand way, you don't even recognize it all the time, where he leaves that home bass and you don't even really, wait, is he in another key center for a second? Yeah. And he always finds his way back. To your point about this journey, home, go away on a journey and come back to where you started.
Now, as far as the tempo of the piece, I've heard performances, I'm sure you guys have too, where this is played even slower than this.
Yeah,
and
I'd say this is on the faster side.
Yeah, this was a little fast for my taste. I like it a little slower. But I've heard it played even faster than this, and it kind of ruined it for me.
Yeah, no faster than this. I wouldn't say.
It's almost hypnotic, right? The tempo, the speed that it moves is almost kind of hypnotic. It almost sounds like almost watery in a way. It just sort of sways and floats and it's like this lilty. I don't know. That's another way you can listen to music, is you can describe the imagery that comes to mind. Maybe it's a scene. Maybe it's maybe it's like, for me, it's like an open window with a silk curtain kind of thing, with a Martha Stewart filter. There's all these different ways, and I think it's fascinating to like actively and sort of precisely practice each one, listen through actively to try to figure out what's going on musically, harmonically, if you have the ability. Try to write down what instruments are happening, and then forget everything musical, and then just write down how it makes you feel, or what imagery comes to mind.
Yeah, that's funny you say that. I used to do that with my music appreciation students on like their first week, and then I would do it last week of the semester and just see how much they've changed in that. Not that you always have to visualize music. As a matter of fact, it took music, at least in the Western world, some time to develop the idea of putting imagery to, and then we have people like you that make a living writing music to imagery. But what you see and kind of envision, the emotional mood and stuff, that's what we call subjective, and there is no objective or single way that applies to everybody. So whereas Keith can listen to it and see a curtain and the breeze and stuff, I might listen to it and think of a little trickling spring that has little fishes in it or something. There's no way that Keith's vision is more right than mine. So
or Stanley Kubrick could see a murder scene.
Exactly. So, yes.
Right.
Yes, and that's something we do see sometimes, like in Face Off. What was it played? The Somewhere Over the Rainbow, like a really slow version of it, while there's like a shootout going on in slow motion. So yeah, you can.
I mean, to Harrison's point earlier, it's listening to music is a very personal thing. It's a very subjective thing, and I think that's a great exercise that you do with students, or you did with students, to to have them write those things down. And I bet the variety of experiences you got was really wide.
Yeah. And one of the pieces I often played was the prelude from Psycho.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazed. That was the one that amazed me the most, because you know what almost everybody wrote down?
What?
I'm being chased by someone. Which I wish I could play that, because that is, especially Danny Elfman's adaptation to the remake.
Yeah.
It's even like faster and more aggressive. So, yeah. But, yeah, so with the tempo of this and everything like that, that's great observations there. Which piece do we want to do next? And I did add a couple, just in the time that I let you guys know about. I did add the first movement to Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata, and I'm trying to remember what the other thing I added was. But Harrison, pick one of these. Was there one that stuck out to you, or one that you're really familiar with?
Which movements of the Pathétique do you have here?
The first and second movement.
First and second.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. I guess we could go with the first one.
Okay. So we'll go ahead and bring it up. This one, first of all, you know, a lot of people have heard of Beethoven. He is after Bach. He lived, he knew of Bach. He actually was a bigger fan of Bach's contemporary Handel, George Friedrich Handel. But Beethoven was familiar with Bach and probably learned a lot about counterpoint and fugue writing from him, even though Beethoven really didn't write too many fugues. But this piece is a piano sonata. Sonata is in contrast to a cantata. Cantata means to sing. Sonata means to sound, and it historically applies to instrumental music. So this is a piano solo, and it's usually in different movements. You heard us talking about movements. A movement is just, think of it as like chapters in a book. You know, they are connected. They're meant to be experienced as one big work. As a matter of fact, Beethoven was the first that I know of that in his Ninth Symphony that he started quoting in the last movement. He quoted the first, second, and third movement in the beginning of the fourth movement. So he was one of the first to literally incorporate the movements with each other. But this is going to be the first movement. It starts off kind of slow and dark, and then it lets on the fireworks. So we're going to listen to this opening, which I believe the tempo marking is grave, which is pretty slow.
Yeah, one of us both.
So speak to that opening just right there. So you start off on, you want to speak to what a minor chord is, because this opens up on a C minor chord. What kind of emotional reaction do most people have to, say, a minor chord?
Usually a darker emotion, sadness or fear.
And the register of this C minor chord, it's a low C minor
Yeah.
chord. So that adds to, if we're speaking emotionally listening to this, that the lower register that on the piano, when you put notes close together, you know, composers speak about it as a muddy voicing. These low notes that are close together, that really affects the effect of this chord.
Yeah. So think of register, like you said, it's usually just a range, you know, low register, just like my voice is lower than, you know, the standard female voice. Female voices are in a higher register or range. So yes, not only is it a C minor chord, you know, because if you were to play the same chord high up, ching, you know, like it would not have that gravity to it. Like
have a totally different emotion, even though it's the same type of chord.
Oh yeah, or if Danny Elfman was doing it, he would have a bunch of vocal, you know, female sopranos going, you know, doing little arpeggiated C minor, and it would have this, you know, whimsical, spooky kind of feel to it. But how does it feel to you, Harrison and Keith, when you hear this low? Like, what is that? Like you said, that has weight and gravity to it.
It sounds like devastating. In some capacity. Like, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened. Whatever it is.
Especially with what comes after in the context of that first opening bars, opening phrase. To me, like, knowing what's coming after this, it sounds like a big, like, resigned, it sounds like resignation to me. It just sounds like somebody just kind of giving up and or they're on the
Yeah.
other side of something very difficult. And now I'm telling a story.
Right.
That's another way to listen, is to tell a story around it. And maybe this is the right live stream for this. It's a sort of a deeper part of the conversation, I guess. But like these emotional reactions that we have, sometimes they're mostly universal and agreed upon. Like people will hear this and yeah, it sounds, I don't know, sad or resigned, or most people would agree that it's on the darker side of the emotional spectrum.
Yeah.
The question for me is, and I guess we can get into this if you'd like to, but the question for me is that cultural conditioning, or is there something natural about that sound that brings out these emotions in us? I don't have that answer, but I think it's a fascinating thing to talk about.
I think it's probably a blend of both, because there definitely is a lot of cultural conditioning, but there's also, there is a science to how sound waves interact with one another. So for example, like, the minor chord that we were talking about, which generally sounds sadder or darker, that kind of is pushing against how sound waves naturally want to interact with each other. So it makes it sound a little less pleasant, a little less nice. But then exactly how we specifically define the not niceness of the minor sound, I think that's probably more cultural.
Yeah, I mean, it's a musical language, and just like French is different from English. In English, we don't have gender to our words, but English is still mostly derived from like Latin, just like French is. So like you can hear some French words and know exactly what those words mean, or you can hear kind of the way a Frenchman is speaking, their body language when they speak. All of that is kind of, and granted, that's all in the West, but even with someone speaking Chinese, you can usually tell if they're upset or happy. And it's kind of like the wheel. No culture has developed a square or triangular shaped wheel. Like you can, that's the way I see music. Music will evolve no matter what, culture you're talking about, it's going to develop certain types of things with its language and the way it communicates.
French words like pathétique.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, everything was stylish in the France. Napoleon Bonaparte. Beethoven was a huge admirer of Bonaparte until he crowned himself emperor, and that's why the Third Symphony is called the Eroica. It was originally called the Bonaparte, and Beethoven scratched it out because he thought Bonaparte was going to bring about liberty and stuff, and instead he crowned himself Holy Roman Emperor and became a dictator, and Beethoven was like, nope. So pathétique.
The idea that the word pathétique is in the title of this, pathos, right? Which is
yes,
emotion, right? He had this in mind when he wrote this sonata, that this is, I wish there was a better word, but the word is pathetic. We've lost the original sort of meaning of that, pathos, pathosic, emotional. That was his intention here.
Yeah. Well, and you're exactly right. The word pathetic, unfortunately, means something very different nowadays. And when I first saw the name of this piece, I think I was very young. I was like, why would Beethoven call his own work pathetic? Did he not like it? So
I think I had the same reaction.
Yeah, but it's pathétique, and it, like Keith said, it's from the Greek word pathos, because the ancient Greek philosophers, they talked about pathos, which is emotion, logos, which is like logic. It's where we get the word logic. And then you had ethos, which is like personality. So, someone has we talk about cults of personality. You ever meet someone and they're just extremely charming? You may not like them very much, but you're like, man, that person's kind of likable, even though they might be a scumbag, that's ethos. They persuade you with rhetoric and other tricks of personality. So, but anyway, we're going to appeal to pathos here, emotion. I'm going to go back and play that opening chord. This time in the context, it's not just the chord, it's what he does right after that. So let's hear that again. Up. So sorry about the little lag there, but what did Beethoven say after that grave? Like you said, Keith, is like someone's ready to give up. But what came after that? Do you think he was trying to say with that?
It sounds like a question. It sounds like if I hear it as a sort of he's on the other side of something difficult and he's resigned to it. Maybe he's grieving. I don't know. It just sounds like he's like, man, what the hell just happened? It sounds like a question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like he's vacillating between two emotional states, one of like initial shock and then maybe just trying to process whatever happened. And then, it's kind of almost emulating the irrational mind, just how like emotions can run amok. It's intense one moment and it's kind of calm the next, and then as we'll hear, it gets intense again.
Yes, very much so. So let's keep playing it and see what happens next. So dum da dum da dum dum. Another dissonant chord. A third time. And Harrison, talk about surprises. That went to a surprising place, didn't it?
Yeah. Suddenly became major, or contrasts the minor sounds that we've been hearing up until now. It suddenly sounds nice.
Yeah, it's almost like, I guess, if he was kind of defeated and, he was wallowing in his own self-pity, and then he was like, you know what, that's not going to get me anywhere. Let's get up and make the bed and do the dishes and get stuff done.
The sun also rises, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if we should be convinced. It might just be copium, right?
Yeah, let's see where this is going, because like he started, and you notice that it's picked up some kind of beat here. The beat was almost undetectable.
Yeah.
Like I've played this before, and I know when you're playing it, you kind of have to count the beats in your head. But if you go back and listen to it, it's almost like it's just free flowing. But here we're starting to get doom, doom, doom with the left hand. The chords are coming in with a type of pulse.
Like the opening's almost conversational in a way, and then it finds its way. There's a motor in
it. So we're going from like sweet to less sweet, almost angry. Almost sounds like an argument.
Yeah.
It does sound conversational.
It's like the lower registers arguing with the... Now they're both getting angry.
And again, it's that low register. The notes are clustered closer together.
Mm-hmm.
And that's darker. And then here, wait, back that up.
Mm-hmm.
If you could, back 10 seconds. Sort of, it builds up, rises. It just sort of lifts up in the high register, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're building up to it's almost like the whole thing falls apart. And then so let's stop.
We're off to the races.
Yeah, off to the races. So when it goes up to this high note, and then we have this literal fall, and then if you listen to this part that comes in, first of all, the left hand's like it's kind of creating like that sense of motion. And if you listen to the right hand, you've got that steady digga 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 digga. The right hand is going dun 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 dun. It goes from a what we call syncopated, like hitting unexpected points, and then it goes dun 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 to bum 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 right on the beat, and it goes right back to the bum 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 bum. So it's going between like, kind of almost like against the grain to with the grain, against the grain with the grain kind of thing.
Listening rhythmically, just to how the patterns change up.
Yeah.
So, and feel free to speak over this when it's happening, but I'm going to play that part here where it's doing that. You'll listen to the on the beat, and then back off and syncopated. Now we have something new. We talked with the Bach, we're kind of going to foreign territory here. And this is conversational too.
Yeah. It's very much call and response.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds more like Bach.
Yeah. Now, how would you describe the bass part to the treble, the higher up? The bass tends to go bum 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 bum. And then the top part was mimicking it, like, and then you notice the right hand starts going diddly 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 diddly, like playfully. So, what do you think that's trying to say between the stern bass, very simplistic bum 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 bum, versus a diddly 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 doot?
To me, this moves from what starts as a very emotional opening to it sounds narrative. Mm-hmm. Now it sounds like a conversation, because in a way he's created, and you just played both of them, two characters. In a way, he's creating characters here that are having a conversation. We can only kind of speculate what they may or may not be talking about, if that's the intention at all, is to have characters. To me, it's harder to nail down how I would label this emotionally. I'm more apt now to analyze it structurally and conversationally.
Right.
It's interesting that as the tempo increases, it seems less emotional to me.
Yeah. And the opening, by the way, is a bit unusual for a first movement. Like we said, the second movement's usually the slower one. It's very unusual that's one of the things that Beethoven was known for, coloring outside the lines and doing his own thing. To open up with, that dramatic, slow-paced opening like that, quite unusual for his day. So,
well, can you talk about the tempo marking that says up in the title? So we start with grave.
Yeah, grave, and then that's the opening, the introductory section. And then if you were to look in the actual sheet music, when it goes bum 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 bum, where the tempo changed there and it got faster and stuff, it's allegro di molto e con brio. Do you want to tackle that translation? Or you want me to?
Fast with motion.
Yes.
And with cheese.
No, it's not brie, it's brio.
Oh, it's not cheese?
It's spirit.
Trying to remember what brio
fire.
is.
I've seen it translated as spirit or fire. So, but I think it's literally like with spirit, I think. Am I wrong on that, Keith? Or I can't remember.
I thought it was cheese, so I don't know.
Yeah, I think con brio means with spirit or...
I should know.
Yeah, well... and that's something else we could talk to, the barriers that sometimes classical music has is people see words like this and they're intimidated by it. And nobody wants to be around stuff. It's like hearing if you're in a small group of people and suddenly everybody's talking a language you don't understand, what does that feel like?
Alienating.
Yeah, it's very alienating. You feel stupid. You feel like everything they're saying is about you when they're probably not talking about you, and you become extremely self-conscious and uncomfortable. And this is something I always encourage with my students, is that don't let this stuff intimidate you. It's just words. You know, in Beethoven's day, like almost all the great teachers were Italian, so they learned what their teachers, you know. Keith, our teacher, was Italian. He was Sicilian, but he didn't speak Italian. Now, had he spoke strictly Italian, you and I would have picked up a whole bunch of Italian learning underneath him.
Yeah, I would have known what brio means.
Exactly.
Now I know after just looking it up that you're right. It means with spirit or with vigor.
That's right. So,
but just a funny little side note with the sheet music that I write for my transcriptions. I used to pretty much only use the Italian terms that we have here. Lately, though, I've pretty much been sticking to English because I didn't want to alienate anyone or make them feel excluded.
Except the Italians.
Yeah, except the Italians.
Right. So,
but
no, that's good. I think that's.
But yeah, I wanted to try to make it more accessible.
Yeah, and I think classical music has done better with that. I think in the 20th century you did see a big movement to making classical music more accessible and stuff. And
because aside from like tradition, don't really see a reason to stick to the Italian.
Yeah.
It's I mean, it comes from the tradition because the Italians are the ones that invented sheet music. At least the system we use today. It was the Catholic Church, which is based out of Rome.
Right.
You know, they are the ones that started writing down something called Gregorian chant, and it was 4 lines with little dots on them, and now we've expanded it to 5 lines that we still write dots on them. So even though that's a Western tradition kind of developed out of the Catholic Church, even if you go to like Japan, modern day Japan, and you want to buy sheet music of an anime theme song in Japan, it's going to be written with 5 lines that way, you know. I mean, we do have other notation systems like guitar tablature and stuff, but the predominant sheet music, like if you just Google sheet music, you're going to see basically a leftover thing from the Middle Ages, which is writing a bunch of dots on horizontal lines. So
was it Adam Neely that had a video about sheet music and notation and like its merits versus its shortcomes?
That guy has a video about everything. I try to keep up with him, but he just, man, his
stuff is fantastic.
He produces so much content too. I'm sure he has like a team around him at this point, but
he's got it.
Yeah, I made a video on Gregorian chant, so if you want to know, you know, I go into the origins of that and stuff, so you can check it out. But let's listen more to this because we are running out of time really quickly here. I knew this was just going to fly by, but let's listen to more here. Again, we got the bass kind of boom, 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 and then the treble kind of answering it. It's almost like they're slightly arguing now. And now we have something a little different.
I don't know about you guys, but I can't resist writing a story or like trying to make some kind of sense out of it, create a meaning, for a subjective meaning for myself. It's so interesting how I'm watching my brain do that, but I think the brain in general, of course, it's always looking for patterns and to create meaning and order and stories. That's a very human thing that we all just kind of tend to do, and that's a great way to listen to music. Yes, it's a form of passive listening, I think, because you're not trying to figure out what's happening musically. Mm-hmm. But I don't know about you guys, but I'm constantly like, if it is two characters, what are they fighting about? Are they agreeing or disagreeing? How is this pathetic? You know, where's the pathos here? You know, I'm always looking for a story or a narrative. It's just interesting how I can't help but do that.
Well, that part where it was kind of noodling and quiet was like dig-dig-dig, and I can tell you the hands are quite close together when you're playing that part, and then as it builds up, your hands are moving away from each other, and when it hits the climax of that, it's like they're on the almost the far extremes of the keyboard. At least the keyboard in Beethoven, say, you know, they're pretty wide out. It's literally two characters, like they're kind of trying to patch things together, but they're just really just drifting further and further apart.
And they have to go in the other room and cool off.
Yeah. Exactly. So, let's keep it going here, and
But it could be that none of this was in Beethoven's head. It's most likely none of it was.
Yeah.
And there's that kind of sort of callback to the opening chord, and there's that opening chord again. So,
and now we're in. That's a G minor.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have perfect pitch. My piano's in front of me. I'm just that guy with a piano hammer.
Yeah.
It's following along.
So, unlike the opening, this was kind of setting us up for something different.
Somewhere different.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's dying away. It's
it's not.
It's almost like as soon as you get comfortable in a little passage, he's like moving on to something else.
But doesn't it sound like storytelling?
Oh yeah.
It's so different than the Bach, right? The Bach, I mean, it does. You can sort of overlay a narrative over air on a G string and come up with your own imagery, but this sounds like a drama. This sounds like.
Oh yeah. And this is the height of the drama. This is. You have a little cadenza-like passage here.
And I think because it's not an orchestral piece, because it's just a single instrument, you really can only think of it as a dialogue between two sort of characters, I suppose.
Yeah.
If you want to listen in a narrative sense, because there's only really just the one sound coming out of one instrument, you can really only think of it as a dialogue between two.
Yeah.
As opposed to an orchestral piece where you could have 40 characters.
Right. I guess with having only two hands, it lends itself to two characters better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll go back.
Very different than the Bach.
Very different.
But not that far away from each other historically.
And that could be an interesting way of actively listening too, is to try to compare and contrast different composers' styles.
Yes.
To try to identify, like, what is it about this composer that's different from this composer.
Right.
Absolutely. And that's why, when we teach like music appreciation or stuff, or if, I'm working on a video about Antonio Vivaldi right now, and I open up kind of speaking about what was life like for people back then. How was it different than it was today? How do modern musicians operate different than the way Vivaldi had to? What did they have to do to live back then? What kind of stuff did they have to put up with that modern musicians don't have to today?
Why did they write music at all?
Yeah. Why did they, yeah. So it's, there's never any shortage of things to talk about or think about when you're listening to music. And that's why I think music is to me, it's the superior art form. It's only trumped by cinema, which is using music and combining a bunch of other arts together. It's like grand art, like kind of opera and theater was before it. So, but music as far as a standalone art to me is the most superior because it can be experienced on such a personal level. It can be experienced as a group, as a whole society experiences it. And it takes place in time. A book, it may take you 5 minutes to read through a chapter. I may go back, there's no set time on which you look at it. Painting, you might stand in front of it for 5 minutes or study it for 5 years, the same way it goes with music, but music we all experience in the same time. When I'm hitting pause here, we're stopping our shared experience and then we're hitting play, and any of the people watching online, it's like it exists within time and space in a way that no other art form really does.
And yeah, your point about it's a shared experience and a subjective personal experience both at the same time is a pretty fascinating thing. And it's the only art form I believe. I suppose film too is the same thing because it goes by in time.
Right.
Can we do the Debussy?
Yeah, real quick, let me just play where it goes back into, I'm going to use one of those fancy big music words that alienates people, but we're coming out of the development section, which is the most turbulent part, and we're about to enter the recapitulation, or recap. You ever heard someone say that? We're going to recap what we did last time. So if you remember that
Previously
bump
on
yeah, exactly.
the path of cheeks and up.
But see if you recognize something that's coming back here. So we're building up to that tension there. It's almost like the two characters about ready to kill each other, and then it's like, and then what does this sound like? After the introduction part,
Yeah.
that first
the original, the allegro with motion.
yeah, but here he's doing something different with it. And you can listen to the rest of it on your own, but that's what the recapitulation. You go back to the beginning, but you do everything a little different.
And just listening for the form, you mentioned, when we're talking about Bach, A, B, A. Here you're talking about
Yes,
and that's probably another live stream to talk about the sonata form.
Oh yeah,
that's a
great.
very big deal, and so you're touching on it. That's a deep and endless subject, but it's the idea of you set a thing up, you sort of go away from it, and you come back to it in a different way.
Yeah. It's 3 acts of an opera, 3 acts of a movie. It's that ABA structure.
Right. Narrative.
And,
narrative structure. It parallels narrative structure.
Exactly. So, all right. So this one's going to be a little quiet. So you have to listen. It starts off incredibly quiet. It's just, and we were joking before this, and this is a public domain recording. So again, not the most refined. You will hear someone cough in the beginning, but really pump the volume up as loud as you can or listen with headphones.
And this is probably, let's see, this is 1894.
Yes, 1894.
Considered. Pathetique Sonata was 18 what?
That was probably early 1800s, I think.
Just to give a sense of how much time has passed.
Yeah. Between
these two pieces.
Yeah, if you can Google that real quick, what year the Pathétique? I want to, because Beethoven was a contemporary of like Napoleon Bonaparte, so.
So you can go ahead.
Okay, so we're gonna play this. This is a prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun by a French composer. You want to talk about that opening part?
I love that opening so much.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
I mean, again, talking to my biases, at first I was so drawn in by the unexpected chord movements that I had to remind myself, like, okay, wait, what's the other stuff going on?
So it's important to note that because this comes full circle back to the beginning when you were talking about surprising harmonies, and I'm drawn into these harmonies, and there's too many things to talk about with this one. It was 1799, by the way, the Pathétique. So it was at the end of the 18th century.
Yes, yeah.
And because he lived to 1825, is that right?
Around there, yeah.
Around there. And this is Debussy. So this is 1894. The 1890s were very different musically, culturally, historically, everything. The world was very, very different. And this is Impressionism, right? So you think of the Impressionist painters. They're the Impressionist composers. There's a big two. This guy, Debussy, and Ravel. And there are others, but those are the big two. And you get impressions of images when you hear Debussy. He's actively trying to give you, it says, the prelude of the afternoon of a faun. Mm-hmm. So it's this mythological scene, right?
Yeah, well, it's right there in the title. A satyr, like a faun or a satyr, like from Greek mythology, you know.
Yeah, so it's calling on ancient literature, very visual, and so it's hard to nail down the emotion of this because it doesn't commit to Bach or Beethoven's language of major, minor, pathos, argument, story, characters, narrative. This is just sort of like this picture that floats there.
It's like watercolors that just blend into each other. It's not hard brushstrokes, you know.
It just gives the impression of things. That's why it's the impressionism.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like Beethoven and Bach use harmonic progressions that at this point are very deeply ingrained in our culture, where we expect it to go somewhere. We hear a certain type of tension, and we kind of have a sense of how that's going to resolve with the next note. Something like this, on the other hand,
there's logic to it, right?
Yeah, there's a logic to it that's been culturally ingrained, but something like this completely deviates from that, and so these tensions don't go where you would probably expect them to go, and that just creates this totally different mood.
Right, it's like the ground is gone. You're just sort of floating there. I mean, Debussy's famous piece "La Mer," the sea, sounds like water. It just sounds like you're floating and just kind of you can never find the ground until like maybe the very end. That's another piece, but.
Oh yeah, and water, just like the Impressionist artists, like Monet, almost always had like elements of water. If he didn't have water, it almost looks like he just threw a bucket of water on the canvas, you know, when he was done, kind of thing. So Debussy, very much his water. You know, he did a lot of water themes. I think he did a piece called "Sunken Cathedral" or something. So
it's obfuscation by design. Is that the right word? Obfuscation.
Yeah. Obfuscation. Yes.
Just by design, they intentionally were like. We're gonna do the absolute minimum until people can just make out something orderly here, and that's all we're gonna do. We're not gonna do anything more, and then it carries over into all forms of art at the time, especially in music.
And just like a lot of Monet's paintings, like if you get really close up, you see the individual little dots, but if you pull back, it melds together into just wonderful collages of color and things like that. And that's a big word, color, too. I have a video on tone color. That is a huge aspect of music. So we use the word color to describe sound, even though color, we don't perceive color with our ears, do we? But, you know, we do the same thing to describe visual stuff. Like if I wore like a bright neon yellow shirt, you would say, whoa, that shirt's loud. It's not making any sound, but, you know, that's because we don't really have words to describe what our senses feel.
Not in English.
Not in English. Well, not in any language. I think that's why music is the language of our senses.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, that's why we say the color, that this, you know, the tone, things like this, that the music evokes. We have to use words that don't really make a lot of sense.
Sure. Yeah. We have to kind of we have to use analogies and metaphors. It's kind of like this, it's kind of like that, and it reminds me of this image, and it's such an sort of ethereal thing to try to describe.
And I feel like
especially
sound,
as you get into this music.
Yeah, and like sound is just especially abstract. I feel it can be harder to describe sometimes in other senses.
Yeah.
Yeah. And agreeing on what it means outside of language, once you get into music, agreeing on meaning is you pretty much can't do it. You can't agree. That's why we're back to subjectivity, right? It's a personal thing. I think it's important to talk about in this Debussy piece, the tone colors. It opens with a flute, and we hear the sound of a harp. We hear, I think, an individual horn player.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Can we go back to the top?
Yeah, like the very top of it.
Yeah, maybe 10 seconds in, after the flute's been playing a bit, and after the person coughs.
I actually didn't notice the cough.
Yeah, it's.
There it is.
Sustaining, single horn, low strings just sort of dropping in.
Mm-hmm.
middle. Bottom drops in again. Sounds like a key center, but it's not really. And then that's a sense of tension and release there, but completely different. It's not based on logic, it's just based on feeling almost.
Yeah, and then you have the tremolo strings, which, you know, in film music, what do we use the soft tremolo strings for? It's like...
Yeah, suspense, anticipation.
Yeah, or it could be romantic.
Whimsical,
Yeah.
fluttery.
Yeah, it can be done, you know, those techniques, but when I think of like the little quivering, it's almost like, you know, you're a teenager again, about to do your first kiss, and you're kind of like shaking with anticipation.
Yeah, there's this
and if you know anything about the
nervous thing.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's like that nervous anticipation. If you know anything, you know, it's called Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun, but like I said, it really should be like a satyr. And if you know anything about the satyrs, they were almost single-mindedly thinking about, well, we'll keep it G-rated. It's romance, you know, quick romance. And so it's almost like the quivering, you know, some of this music was considered quite scandalous for its day because it sounded erotic, and, you know, kind of like it really just kind of went straight for the flesh and blood, you know.
See, that's funny. Again, speaking to the subjectivity, is that is not how I was processing this music at all. I did not interpret it in that type of way.
It could be a lot more innocent.
It
could be a lot more innocent, but you know, it's even like Rite of Spring, which I mentioned that Keith did a analysis of the famous Rite of Spring chord. Go watch that video if you haven't, even if you're not a musician. It's a fascinating video. So, but in Rite of Spring, you know, it's when I first heard it, I didn't know the context. I didn't know the story of the ballet it was written to. And I just remember our teacher told us, you know, it started a riot when it was first, like didn't even get through the first act, apparently. Like it was and I'm sitting there thinking like, yeah, this music's a little different. Like I don't quite understand it, but it sounded more aggressive to me and less, but apparently it was way more scandalous than that.
Right. And that highlights another way of listening to music is you learn the historical context of when these pieces were written, played, and then you listen to it like, let's pretend it's 1894 and I know a little bit about being French, and you can hear it as like, can I hear this as like scandalously erotic? Can I hear this as something that should be censored or banned? Something as revolutionary. Is it possible to hear it that way once you learn the context? Is another way to listen to music.
Oh yeah, and sometimes people hear what they want to hear. You know, it's like the Kingsman, the Louis Louis song. People swear there's an F-bomb hidden in there. I've listened to it many, many times. I do not hear an F-bomb.
I hope it's in there.
Apparently it was. Apparently the guy, when they recorded it, like in his garage, like that was one of the first garage bands, like apparently he just shouted it out, and that was one of the things they tried to, I think it actually did get pulled off the airwaves, and I think the records got censored.
It started a riot at the radio station.
Yeah, music, you know, all good art's always controversial. So we do have a comment here. Do y'all listen to mostly classical? No, I mean, we listen, I think all three of us have very eclectic taste in music. The big reason, and you may have missed the beginning of this, the big reason we're having to focus on classical is because of copyright and YouTube being quite strict. So if I start pulling out some Amy Winehouse or, you know, something like that, this video will be taken down or restricted. It will not be, you know, and I'm not going to get a copyright strike against me. So believe me, you can apply everything we're talking about with classical music to pop music. Now, let's speak to that because we only have a couple minutes left. Let's speak to moving away from the classical. And believe me, we could do a whole live stream on a Prelude, Afternoon of a Faun, or any of these pieces.
Sure.
I say we do another episode on this, if not several. But
you could do one just talking about Impressionism.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and if you guys have any suggestions on what we can talk about, you know, drop them in there. We'll consider them. You know,
can I answer Vitamin Banana real quick?
Yeah, go right ahead.
I actually, I mean, I do love the Beastie Boys as well, but no, I
Sabotage.
I started out as a guitar player, as a metalhead when I was about 12. I wanted to be Eddie Van Halen, and I wanted to be Slash, and I was a big, still I'm a big fan of bands like Megadeth and Anthrax and Metallica. I saw Def Leppard a couple weeks ago here in LA, which was really fun.
They still had the one-armed drummer.
They do, and they still sound
Yeah.
great.
Wonderful.
It's not the original lineup because one of them passed away, but
Yeah.
I do love me some hair metal. I'm a big jazz fan. I was a jazz guitar player for like a hot second until I realized just how difficult it really is, so I quit. But so no, I feel like as a composer, arranger, orchestrator, you have to be a fan of everything and have to find value in every type of music. Otherwise, if you don't, you're not doing it right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
for the record, I would say the new Sabrina Carpenter record is really good. Just as a fan of pop music, on top of that.
Yeah. I mean, you can glean stuff from any genre, any style. I've learned stuff from, surprisingly, like, you know, and it goes both ways. Like, I've listened to hip hop that has taught me stuff that classical never could. But then again, you've got hip hop artists that take classical, you know, like Alicia Keys used the Moonlight Sonata in one of her songs, and she's a trained classical pianist. So she, you know, it goes full circle. I think the best musicians are very eclectic, and that's a big word. I know. It just means you have varied taste. You're not sold to just one thing. So,
as a composer, it can be a lot of fun trying to mash different genres together in ways that they aren't usually combined.
I'm a big
Absolutely.
Frank Zappa fan, and he does that very well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you know, that could be an entirely different conversation. Is just how listening to many different genres and styles of music, it's beneficial. Just like we had an episode on the benefits of learning to transcribe music and stuff. There's benefits to listening to stuff, and I try to do this at least once a week. Listen to something I've never listened to before. You know, just if I go on, and you have the tools to do that. You have Spotify, Pandora, YouTube. You can go on YouTube and literally, or you can ask Chat GPT now. You know, we talked about AI in our last thing, you know, get AI to suggest you some stuff, you know, just literally ask Chat GPT, like, I don't know anything about bebop, you know, tell me who's, you know, someone that does bebop, and then go listen to a few of their songs. You know, anything else y'all want to speak to that? I know we're 1 minute over, so let's try to wrap things up here. Any final thoughts on anything we've talked about?
I just think there's so many different ways to listen to music, and I think paying attention and having mindfulness in the moment of listening, having the mindfulness to go, how am I listening to this right now, and do you have the ability to switch into a different mode? It's a really fun game to play.
Oh yeah.
And I know I've met people who maybe sometimes have difficulty connecting with instrumental music or music that doesn't have like words and lyrics. So, you know, to people like that, I would just say that instrumental music really has just as much to say as music with words. It's just saying it in a different way.
It's not saying it literally.
Right. Yeah. It's more implied through the notes and everything. So that could be something interesting to keep in mind.
Absolutely. Just challenge yourself every once in a while. Don't get into a niche and get kind of caught into it. Expand your horizons. That's a big reason I think we taught music appreciation, you know, at the college level. And I've even taught, you know, elementary kids and stuff. And I always had them listening to all kinds of music. And I guess what you said, Keith, was so important, mindfulness. And if you don't know what that is, study it, because mindfulness is something we are losing as a culture and losing it fast. It's something that I think our generation is coping with a little more because we grew up without these things in our pockets and on our person. And the analogy that I like to use is fireworks. Have either one of you ever filmed fireworks with your cell phone while you're at a fireworks show?
I don't think so.
Yeah, see,
Actually.
I have. and there's a reason I stopped, because I would film it and I was like drawn in, by the technology. And also I was thinking, this is going to be great and everything. But I noticed I was not enjoying the fireworks. I was too focused on recording it and making sure it was in frame and anticipating where it was going to go. I was not having any mindfulness to it. And I also noticed that 3 years later, I never went back and watched that footage once. So I basically wasted my time and missed out on an experience. Now, the reason I say that is look at any modern day concert and what do you see? They're people wanting to share that moment on their TikTok more than they're in that moment themselves.
How do you listen to live concerts? That's another, are you being mindful with how you're listening? That's a great point.
Yeah.
Are you listening, or are you just collecting it so you can sort of have it as an experience trophy later on?
Experience trophy. I love that. That is a great, experience. That's what modern life is mostly, is an experience trophy. So, but anyway, great talks, guys. I appreciate your time. I know we're all very busy people. Again, we don't really have a set schedule for these live streams. We're going to talk off camera about, when we all have time in our schedules to do this again, hopefully. We may bring in other people. I've reached out to a few people to maybe bring in on this. So we may have some where we have more people, and some it may just be, one day where only me and Harrison can meet or something. Keith may be out of town or something. So, or whatever. So we've also entertained the idea of maybe hosting some of these discussions on their channels. So just stay tuned. We'll try to keep you updated with these, and hopefully you've enjoyed watching this. Like I said, make sure that you leave any questions or anything like that. That's always very helpful. We like to see the feedback. Suggest any things that you would like us to talk about, and we'll consider them. Make sure that you like and subscribe. That really helps all three of our channels. Not that we're in this for any other reason other than the algorithm, we don't do these things so that they just go off into the ether. We want to, invigorate people, inspire people, get people passionate about music like we are. So it helps us out, all three of our channels out a lot, if you like and subscribe. Thank you for viewing. Check out Keith's channel, subscribe to him. Check out Harrison's channel, subscribe to him. And again, check out his, what was it? Dread?
Modern Dread.
Modern Dread. Yeah. So check out that music that he composed. It's fast, really fantastic score. So, but thank you guys so much, and we'll talk again soon.
All right.
Glad to be here.
Till next time.
Yes. Take
Have a
care.
good one.